This is the story, so far, of Ready Steady Crit's Curse of Strahd. The party were summoned by Duchess Morwen of Daggerford to aid her in a matter. This being the first time they had been brought together to work with one another, the Duchess had arranged a fine meal for the four of them. Maximilian, a lean and ex-captain of the guard from Neverwinter, quick with his decisions but not so quick with his words. Callan Astroy, a half-elf courtier who always found himself in the spotlight. Melville, an Aasimar druid of the Misty Forest tribe who had aided in protecting the Delimbir Vale before, and the Mir, a monster hunter who kept to himself. During dinner, the party agreed to aid Duchess Morwen with a matter of a group of travelling folk who had pitched up outside town. She merely wanted the party to frighten them off, as they were harassing locals as they came to and from Daggerford. She wanted the party to deliver a clear message on her behalf: be gone by dawn, or Duchess Morwen would burn their wagons to the ground. The party agreed, and would deal with this matter swiftly, before nightfall. They ventured out after the meal, beyond the walled safety of Daggerford, heading for that hill that lay just outside the town. It was surrounded in these barrel-topped wagons lit with several campfires, and even from the gates they could hear this joyous cackles of merriment. And as they approached, the intoxicated individuals who called this camp theirs welcomed them with open arms, despite their suspicious composition. The group offered them wine and stories, and an all-around good time. Eventually, they found the leader of this group, a man called Stanimir, who, upon receiving the terms from Lady Duchess Morwen's verbatim, agreed to them wholeheartedly on one condition: that the party would listen to his story. The party, eager for this to go off without a hitch, agreed. One story. Stanimir began to warp the fire before them, it taking on illusions to add to his tale as he told them thus. We come from an ancient land whose name is long forgotten, a land of kings. One night a wounded soldier staggered into our camp and collapsed. We nursed his terrible injury and quenched his thirst with wine, and he survived. But when we asked him who he was, he would not say. All he wanted was to return home, but we were deep in the land of his enemies. So we took him as one of our own, and followed him back towards his homeland. His enemies hunted him. They said he was a prince, yet we did not give him up, even when their assassins fell upon us like wolves. This man of royal blood fought to protect us as we protected him, and we bore him safely to his home, and he thanked us. He said, I owe you my life. Stay as long as you wish and leave when you choose, and know that you will always be safe here. A curse has befallen our noble prince, turning him into a tyrant. Now we alone have the power to leave his domain. And as he finished his tale, his face it turned somber and serious, and he told the party thus: You four have been foretold. You shall come to our home in one way or another, and when you do get there, seek out Madame Ava. She rules our people. She will tell you more. And as if to punctuate the point, he provided a coin, an electrum piece, stamped with the profile of a figure they could not recognise, and placed it into the palm of Callan, who had done most of the talking up until that point. Stanimir told them that in the morning they should take any road, and be prepared for a journey, and not to fear the mists when they finally came for them. The party, rightly thinking that this man was perhaps insane or joking with them, disregarded the severity of his warnings, and, job done, they headed back to Daggerford for the evening to collect their reward. They rested, and the following morning the four found themselves sharing breakfast, and they agreed they'd at least had their curiosity piqued by the old man. They readied themselves for a journey and took a walk down a road they had all travelled well. The Tradeway, heading towards the Way Inn, the next settlement to the southeast down the Sword Coast. During their travel, as they bedded down that night, a thick fog encompassed their camp, and when they woke the following morning, they found themselves in a dark, dense wood. Strange, as the Tradeway did not share roadsides with the forest, they were further back across the plains, let alone one this thick, and a grey, heavy mist hung around them like a bad smell. They packed up their things, and did not fear such mist, and pressed on. After heading several miles down the road, they eventually came to a set of imposing gates, which were flanked by two falling away statues. and as they got close, the gates gave a sigh of anguish as they creaked open. The party pressed on into the valley, encountering a body ravaged by wolves in the undergrowth, and among that body's belongings they found a letter, warning them that the writer's daughter had been bitten by a vampire who had plagued this land, and had never come to this wretched place and simply to seal it shut with holy magic. But the messenger was killed before he could escape with such message. Eventually, with only really one way forward, the mist closing in behind them as they pressed on this ever-long road through the forest, they eventually found themselves in the dull hamlet of Barovia, in a sort of like large clearing in the valley, where the woods began to fall back away from them. After exploring this village, they discovered the local priest had something locked in his basement, who eventually, after some encouragement, told the party it was his son, a man named Duro, who had become infected with a curse. He begged for the party not to investigate any further, and they obliged, but not for lack of trying on the monster hunter Namir's part. Also in their escapades in Barovia, they heard sounds of wailing and despair coming from one of the townhouses and checked on the source. They found a mother, weeping over her lost daughter Gertruda. They did what they could and promised to return to her if able. Eventually they met up at an inn in the centre of town, and they met a man who called himself Ismark, who asked the strangers to help him and his sister get their father buried in the local graveyard. They gladly obliged and went to the large manor house that Ismark called home, and he introduced him to his sister, a beautiful woman with pale skin and auburn hair. She introduced herself as Irina. She explained that they had been plagued by the devil, and that if they were to be safe, if they could maybe get her to Vallaki, a village not even a day's travel away. Ismark and Irina had nothing left in Barovia, with their father dead, and would reward them handsomely, but Irina refused to leave until after his funeral. They wanted their father to be buried in the morning light and not the dark of night, which could be quite dangerous, and as the day was coming to a close, they offered them a place to stay in the manor house. During the night, a storm crackled over the village of Barovia, and Melville, one of the more perceptive members of the group, heard a commotion coming from upstairs. The party were roughly awoken as they sort of slept rough and tumble on mattresses and anything they could hobble together to make a bed in the living space downstairs. And as they heard the sounds of chaos, they burst into Irina's room to see a figure floating in the window. A man of pale skin and slicked back black hair, wearing these fine noble robes. "Come to me, Tatiana," he pleaded, and the woman tried to go towards him, locked in a trance. The party intervened, and they managed to close the window before a swarm of bats could get in en masse. They pulled Irina back from the window and held her there for some time until the bats had been dealt with and the man gone. Ismark explained that the man was none else than the devil, Strahd von Zarevich, a man who ruled this valley with a black heart and iron fist. The party, slightly disturbed and perturbed at perhaps the helpful gesture they had put forward maybe was going to be a little more dangerous than they had originally thought, slept through the night and buried the Burgermeister the next morning. But as the funeral was coming to a close, the skies took the form of a face of that angered man from the night before, who announced to the village of Barovia that he had been denied by 4 strangers, and that Barovia, the village, had only 3 days to bring the strangers and Irina Koliana to him, or they would face his might. Irina and Ismark, wrapped in hooded cloaks, went back to the manor house and fetched their horses, telling the party to await them at the chapel. Eventually, they all regrouped, and the group of 6 then rode off and ran out of town, heading southwest across the river and heading, eventually, towards Vallaki. On their travels, they encountered a skeletal rider who bounded past them, and they made no efforts to stop him as he ventured on towards the village they had left behind into the wall of pitchforks and torches that were no doubt hot on their heels. After revealing that they needed to speak to Madame Ava, Ismark and Irina knew the Vistani seer made camp at the Serre Pool, just off the main road. It wasn't a well-travelled route, but it was a path that would eventually lead to the Vallakian road anyway, so perhaps avoiding the mob who would follow presumably the main road, they broke off into a sort of dirt trail and headed up north in that direction. When they arrived, they saw more of those barrel-topped wagons like those they'd seen in Daggerford, among the cold midday mists and under colder, overcast skies. They spoke once more to this group of Vistani around a bonfire here a while, and it felt very similar to that experience they had a few nights before. This time, though, the stories featured stories of a mad wizard who came here, tried to fight the devil, and lost. Eventually, merriment aside, they were pointed towards a large tent and told that Madame Ava awaited them inside. The party left its market arena with the Vistani and sought this woman they had heard so much about, desperate for answers. The tent was dominated by a table in the centre, covered in a black velvet with a crystal bowl atop it. A woman well into her later years was hunched over it, adorned in these trinkets and jewels. At last you have arrived!" she exclaimed, calling them each in turn, by name, revealing the Mir to share a surname with Callan, who was slowly putting together that his brother may not be lost to time, but may be standing right next to him, but still was filled with much uncertainty and doubt, and did not want to broach the topic then and there. Eventually, this old woman produced an old set of cards and began reading them their fortune. She pulled them in turn. The Five of Swords, the Myrmidon. "This card tells of history. Knowledge of the ancient will help you better understand your enemy. Look for a den of wolves in the hills overlooking a mountain lake. The treasure belongs to Mother Night." Then, the Seven of Stars, the Illusionist. "This card tells of a powerful force for good and protection, a holy symbol of great hope. A man is not what he seems. He comes here in a carnival wagon. Therein lies what you seek." The third card, the Three of Coins, the Trader. "This is a card of power and strength. It tells of a weapon of vengeance, a sword of sunlight. Look to the Wizard of Wines. In wood and sand the treasure hides." Then the fourth card, the Queen of Spades, the Mists. "This card sheds light on one who will help you greatly in the battle against the darkness. Avistana wanders this land alone, searching for her mentor. She does not stay in one place for long. Seek her out at St. Maccobia's Abbey, near the Mists." And finally, the fifth card, she placed it down in the black velvet. The King of Hearts, the Ghost. "Your enemy is a creature of darkness whose powers are beyond mortality. This card will lead you to him. Look to the Father's tomb." Still confused, the party pushed for more, but Madame Ava told them she only knew what the cards could tell her, and wished them luck. They eventually continued on their way, following the winding old Slavic road towards Vallaki, passing under the watchful gaze of Castle Ravenloft atop its rocky crag. And, as they passed through another set of gates like those they had before, they soon found themselves on the cusp of the main valley itself, overlooking a large settlement right in the heart of it, on the shores of an icy grey mountain lake, nestled between two mountains, one to the north and one to the south. The rain did not relent from the night prior, and they sought shelter in an old abandoned windmill, which they found out very quickly something sickening was going on in it. Barrels of demon ichor, bones of children. Eventually they were set upon by a coven of night hags, who killed Namir with a blast of lightning. But not before Namir had the last laugh, and ignited the demon ichor, setting the entire windmill ablaze. The hags, weakened but all still alive, fled the windmill, cackling, making threats and promises that they would not be the last the party had seen of them. Meanwhile, Maximilian heard cries for help coming from the windmill, and he climbed up the windmill despite the blaze and rescued two children. Namir mysteriously rose from the dead, his teeth loose in his mouth, and as he pulled at one, they began to come away, as he hacked and coughed up blood. Namir had made a deal with the dark powers of the valley, the terms of which he did not feel appropriate to share with the party. The children safe, and all of the group alive, just about, they continued on with Freak and Myrtle joining the group. Just outside Vallaki itself, the exhausted party were then assailed by 6 direwolves, who they overcame with some luck on their side just before they reached the walled settlements and shut gates of Vallaki. The gate itself was flanked with pikes with wolves' heads impaled on them, and the party sought refuge. Maximilian tried to scare the guards from his desperation and exhaustion into letting them in, but his roars fell upon deaf ears. It was only when Melville transformed into the shape of a direwolf that the guards sounded the alarm, and after much kerfuffle, several escorts arriving, the party were then allowed to enter the town after Callan persuaded their passage, but they would have to speak to the Baron, the Burgomaster of Vallaki, a man called Vargas Valakovich, to decide their fate. Callan's silver tongue once again came useful, and they navigated what could have been a social disaster. The group were escorted by Isaac to the Blue Water Inn, where their horses had already been dropped off for them after they had visited the Baron's house. Isaac showed much interest in Irina, but didn't seem to take any rash action at this time. The party, a little bit unsure of this place, and whilst at the Blue Water Inn, learned of many rumours and whispers about the land around Vallaki and the surrounding area. There was talks of a mad mage who shot lightning bolts into the skies at the far side of Lake Zarevich to the north, a haunted mansion on the hill to the southwest, a ruined town called Berez far to the south at the foot of Mount Gacchus, that apparently was destroyed by Strahd years and years ago. Some people even said there were strange lights that danced from the Burgomaster's attic late into the night, and much more. And despite all of this information, the party still went looking for trouble. Melville in particular, making use of a detect magic spell and his wild companion in the form of a cat, he sought out the source, which was coming from somewhere in the attic. He used his cat to get around to a small hole in the side of the building's upper portion, and in doing so found a raven loft here, with hay and several ravens all nested here. He eventually discovered a chest buried under one of these, which he opened and begun to take things from. However, on one journey, the cat was greeted with the sight of a half-man, half-raven who slashed at it with a sword, killing Melville's companion. Melville confided in the party, and they agreed it perhaps best to leave the tavern for a while. Their time in Vallaki was most definitely an eventful one. After noticing they were being tailed by a strange man, they met with a joyous toy maker called Blinksy, who confided in them about Isaac's strange purchasing habits of dolls with auburn hair and peeled skin, which reminded them of someone who Isaac had shown interest in the day prior. Blinksy asked them to help him acquire a masterpiece, a clockwork man made by his hero, which he believed was somewhere in Castle Ravenloft, and that he would pay them with what little money he had to get his hands on such an animated construct. After the day's events, the party once more reconvened in the Blue Water Inn, the tavern in the centre of the town that the Baron had organised them to have some rooms for a couple of nights, on the promise they'd aid him in finding his missing butler and lady-in-waiting. Whilst discussing their next move, they spotted a colourfully dressed half-elf bard, who they began to wonder if he was the owner of that strange carnival wagon Madame Ava had foretold. After a bit of digging, they discovered Victavio had a wagon across town kept in the Aristex stockyard. That night, the Mir snuck out and found it, but struggled to get into the stockyard and wagon on his own. Especially whenever he got close to the wagon, it let out a ferocious roar and lurched towards him as if a wild beast was inside. He returned to the Blue Water Inn empty-handed but alive, and they made a move the next morning. They all had their second night's rest in that cold valley of Barovia. Now, well rested, the following morning, the rain now eased off, and our heroes came down 6 AM sharp to receive their breakfast from their fine hosts. Whilst they ate, Victavio took his breakfast outside, and returned just as the party finished theirs. It was agreed they would need to hide Irina from Isaac and his strange obsession. This also meant that perhaps Ismark and Irina could mind freak and myrtle the Blue Water Inn, whilst the party did some investigating around town. Suspicious, they headed over to the stockyard and sought out the wagon once more, and during their walk there, Melville spotted someone following them. A short, stubby man with stubby features, and they split up to try to throw him off their tail. Some went towards the wagon, and some went into the actual stockyards main warehouse itself to perhaps buy some things or distract the spy. Namir and Callan eventually found themselves poking around the carnival wagon, when they were assailed by none other than Rictavio himself, who, realizing his cover was already blown, let the disguised self fall briefly, revealing him to be the legendary vampire hunter Rudolf van Richten. He asked them to continue his quest in finding out if the Keepers of the Feather were allied with Strahd. Confused by his request, they agreed, and in exchange for their help, Van Richten took a strange box from a secret compartment in the wagon and gave it to Namir and the group, saying that they would probably need it more than him if they were going to survive this bleak place. He then returned to his disguise and prepared to leave Vallaki, telling them if they headed west, he was making home out of a tower on the shores of a mountain lake called Lake Baratok. Meanwhile, whilst this was happening, Max encountered and confronted Isaac about Irina when the large man with his devilish arm came sniffing around the Blue Water Inn looking for her. Luckily, thanks to Max's well-timed words and a small assist from Danica Martikov, Isaac stormed out, and Irina was safe for now. Meanwhile, across town in hot pursuit, Melville actually found and caught up with the spy, a feeble man who said he was called Erst, and he begged upon being captured, and he begged and begged for his life, and that he was only employed to keep an eye on the party. He even provided Melville with an invitation to dinner at a place called the Wachter House at sundown that night with his employer, a woman called Lady Fiona Wachter. This strange morning of events wrapped up in a matter of hours, and they met up in the tavern to try to rest, just and get a bit of maybe some kind of respite after the chaos. But before they could open the strange box provided to them by Rictavio in the safety of one of their bedrooms, Melville noticed that the windows were being swarmed by ravens, and the door to their room opened up to reveal Danica and Erwin Martikov, who confronted Melville and the party about stealing from potential allies. Erwin, as a kindness, let Melville keep the healing potions he had stolen, but an underlying threat hung in the air. The party then confided in the Martikovs about Rictavio's true form, who Danica said had already dropped by before the party had come back, paid up his tab and left. The Martikovs seemed satisfied by this information. A trust between the family and the party began to be built. The party, alone once more at last, opened the box and revealed inside to be a silver amulet of a sun with a ruby set into its centre. After spending some time with it, they learned its nature. The holy symbol of Ravenkind, an artifact of great power against undead, particularly vampires, which would be incredibly useful, as their rumours were perhaps true that Strahd von Zarovich was such. With no one able to use the item quite yet, they kept it safe in its box and headed off towards the Church of St. Angelo on the west side of town. Upon arriving at the glum church, they were met with more cobwebs in congregation during the bleak morning. Faverlution greeted them, and upon realizing there may be some hope in the form of Max, their fighter, he confided in them about the fact a holy artifact was stolen from under the church, the bones of Saint Andrel himself. Without them, the church was at risk of losing its protective reputation. He asked Max to aid him in getting the bones back, and to not let word get out. Max obliged. Upon the request, the church could perhaps take on a few children they had rescued, and perhaps give shelter to Ismark and Irina. Faverlution agreed, and the party conducted an investigation and found that Jeska, the altar boy, had told Milivoj, the gravedigger, of the bones. Milivoj then admitted to being employed by the coffin maker to steal the bones, and that he was paid handsomely for it. The party sensed a need for urgency to act, and headed back towards the Blue Water Inn. As they travelled, Rictavio and his circus wagon bolted past them, heading west out of town, but they made no effort to stop him. They passed the inn and made their way to the coffin maker's workshop, and after a bit of vocal debate with the owner, who insisted they were closed, the party gained access, and the coffin maker, a man called Henrik, warned them that there were vampires in the upstairs stores room, and that he'd been paid handsomely by a man called Lord von Holtz to get the bones and put up the vampires, which he didn't know were vampires at the time. He even now suspects Van Holtz may be working for the devil himself, and feared for his life. The party told Henrik to hide out at St. Andrew's Church, and that he would be safe there from the devil if that was true, before braving the workshop themselves. Now, with a bit of luck and light footwork, they were able to retrieve the bones from their hiding place upstairs and escape the workshop without even alerting the vampires to their presence. They headed back across town, taking Ismark and Irina with them, and returned the bones to their final resting place. Favrlution was most grateful. They then reminded Milivoj and Henrik to never make that mistake again. They left Ismark and Irina at the church for their safety, now that it was once more hallowed ground. A job well done, and it being lunchtime, the party finally went back to the Blue Water Inn, where they told Danica about their invitation to dine at the Wachter House that evening, hoping to gain some information from the sort of master of spies of a good tavern keep full of gossip and know-how. She pointed out 2 drunk noble boys who she claimed were the sons of Lady Fiona Wachter. They bought wine for Nikolai and Karl Wachter, who seemed uninterested in their mother's doings. They just wanted to drink, have a good time, spend their mother's money. The party didn't turn up much, bar the fact that the father of the twins was very sick and bedridden, and they'd not seen him in weeks due to his, very weak condition. After Nikolai and Karl got way too drunk, Danica eventually turfed them out, and the Mardikovs invited the party into the kitchen, where they confided in the group that they were part of an order called the Keepers of the Feather. They wanted Melville to stop trying to talk to any old raven using his speaking with animals spell, as Strahd has spies everywhere, and although ravens can be trusted, it was not always a guarantee that something else wasn't listening. Erwin also asked them if they would be able to stop by the Wizards of Wine's winery on their travels if they were heading west, and to check on his father, who he lovingly dubbed the Old Crow. The party said they'd keep an eye out for them, and the Mardikovs said they would keep an eye out for them and wish them luck that night with the dinner. Now, after a short course of shopping and getting ready, a little bit of noble attire here and there to make sure they looked the part, they came to the Wachter House, where they had a fine dinner and were propositioned by Lady Fiona Wachter to help her bring down the Baron, who claimed that he had been up to no good and that his festivals were not helping Vallaki, and the party, unsure, said they would consider the opportunity and left. However, they didn't leave. They sniffed around the house and found a cellar entrance on the eastern side, which they broke into, and awoke a literal militia of skeletons that were hidden under the soft dirt floor. The sounds of combat roused the rest of the house to come down and investigate. A brutal battle occurred, followed by a strange series of interrogation and slight torture, before the party, out of panic, ended up killing everyone in the Wachter house, including an imp, a strange group of cultists who were Vallakians, and even the servants, just to try to keep themselves from being identified by guards. The party then searched the house, finding several oddities. 5 scrolls for pieces of land given to the Wachter family by Strahd himself centuries prior, a book written by Fiona Wachter called The Devil We Know, and the Grimoire of the Four Quarters by Devostas, and a love letter to Lady Lovina Wachter from Lord Vasily von Holtz. They even found the body of Lady Wachter's husband, dead for who knows how long, preserved by magic, no doubt, laid on the Lady Wachter's bed, suggesting that she slept next to the corpse. They also found a young girl, the daughter of the Wachter family, who was convinced she was a cat. She called herself Little Kitty and stuck to Max, the Leonin, like glue. Eventually, she took her favourite cap buttons from the library, but the party could explore no more. The guards had realised something was amiss, perhaps due to the massive pool of blood the party had left outside the building whenever one of the members of the family tried to run away, and they simply hunted him down and knocked him unconscious, and then dragged his bleeding body back to the cellar. The guards, alarmed, organised a team to investigate, led by Isaac himself. Discovering the party and the insane events here, Isaac escorted them and Stella to the Burgomeister's mansion, where they had a very, very late midnight discussion about the events that actually happened in the Wachter house. The Burgomaster didn't really want to hear too much. He was in fact very pleased they had rid him of his biggest rival, and he agreed he would cover up the true incidents that happened at the Wachter house for them, on the one condition: they made sure to return to Vallaki every evening to the Blue Water Inn until the cover-up had been completed, so as to not arouse suspicions as if they were running away from something they'd done. They also discussed what might happen regarding Stella, the heir to the Wachter family land and fortune. The Baron suggested she would need married off to another noble family, heavily suggesting his son, perhaps? Or maybe another noble in town. The party negotiated to send her to the Church of St. Andrel, so that her madness could perhaps be cured by Favrlution. The Burgomeister obliged, but sent Isaac with them to prevent them from fleeing town. They left Stella with Irina and Ismark to be cared for, and asked Favrlution to cure her madness, which he did, and Stella revealed she was turned mad by the son of the Baron, who had cast a spell on her. Favolution told him Vallaki was probably not a safe place for Irina anyway now, and she should perhaps continue on to the Abbey of St. Markovia in Kresik, and that Stella could perhaps even find a permanent cure for her madness there, as his lesser restorations would not be permanent solutions. The party were then escorted back to the Blue Water Inn and rested for the night. Danica agreed to take Freak and Myrtle and keep an eye on them until the party could find a more permanent home for them in the church, but not wanting to throw all of their cards at Favolution at once, they figured it best to stagger such agreements. During the night's rest, Nemir awoke during the night to see a familiar figure floating at his window. Strahd von Sadovich. He beckoned Nemir to come outside, and he and Nemir shared a conversation about the dark powers that he had made a pact with. Strahd suggested that Nemir should seek out the Amber Temple, and invited him and the party to come to his castle for a nice dinner sometime, so that they could get to know each other. Nemir said only that he'd think about it, and Strahd turned into a bat and flew away, back towards the east, towards Castle Ravenloft, far among the mists. The rest of the third night's sleep went fairly uneventfully for the party, and they awoke the next day, after a small sleep-in due to their late night's antics, and left the Blue Water Inn just before midday. They split up once more, with Max and Callan visiting Blinksy, purchasing a doll for Stella. Meanwhile, Nemir bought some writing supplies, and then forged a letter, and found a courier to deliver it to him. The party then regrouped and headed north towards Lake Zarovich, and as they were leaving town, a messenger caught them and delivered them a pair of letters, one marked by the Baron's seal, which instructed them to meet the Baron that night at 7 p.m. at his manor for dinner and to discuss a matter of great importance. The other was from someone who deemed himself the Hermit of Berez, who asked the party to meet them at the old church and to help them with a growing issue. The party, keeping those in mind, put them away for later and continued out towards the lake. They rode out and stopped a drunk man called Bluto from drowning a young Vistani girl called Arabelle. They spoke to Bluto, provoking him, and in an attempt to work out why he was doing what he was doing, he revealed it was to give life back to the lake in the hope that it would give him fish, so that he could sell it and buy more booze. And upon further pushing as to why he needed it so much, they realized the drunk was drinking to suppress something. And after keeping him sober for a while, he mentioned that his last sober thoughts were from many, many years prior, probably 2 decades, he would say. The young girl running into the woods after wolves attacked her and her brother when they were playing. Her brother lost his arms, and Bluto could only save that one of them. Melville began to put pieces together, remembering back to the letter they found on the body, right back at the start of the adventure, which mentioned that Irina Kolyanich was the adopted daughter of Burgomaster Kolyan the Rich, and that perhaps her real identity was the sister of Izek. It would explain the obsession he had over her, and perhaps it was repressed from a childhood memory. Now left with more answers, but also more questions to go along with them, the party agreed to take Arabella home to the Vistani camp just south of Vallaki, with the promise of her father would reward them greatly. They took Bluto and Arabelle there, returning to her father and his brother, who rewarded them with a lockbox of wealth. The Vistani opted to keep Bluto, and the party headed back towards Vlaki's walls, hearing the screams of a man they would no doubt never see again. They headed straight for St. Angel's Church, the origin of Irina in their minds. Max provided Stella with the Blinksy doll he got earlier that day, whilst Melville revealed Irina's possible routes to her. He even suggests Irina should meet with Izek, which she, after a little bit of pressuring, reluctantly agreed to. But after a heated inter-party debate, Max even yelling at Irina that she should not meet with Izek, Irina broke down and ran to her room to cry and hide. Max, realizing what he'd done, panicked and he fled Vallaki, running west as far as he could go. Nemir gave chase, meanwhile Callan and Melville awaited their return, having a somber moment at the graves. Nemir eventually caught Max about 1.5 miles outside of town, just beyond the Lunar River crossroads. Nemir talks some sense into Max, and they agree to return, but as they turn to leave, the skeletal rider passed by them once again, heading in the opposite direction as before. They decided to hasten their journey back to Vallaki. Eventually, they all regrouped at the Blue Water Inn and rested before going to their scheduled meeting with the Baron that night. In a sick mirror of what they'd experienced the night before, the Baron and his wife dined with them, discussed a few topics of interest, mainly that the Walkers had been performing necromancy, and that their own undead had attacked them, killing the family all bar Stella, who was saved. They also discussed the Baron's missing people more, and began to come up with a way to find out where perhaps they had gone or what had happened. Melville, always one to make trouble, slipped away from the dinner, claiming to need the bathroom or that he had heard an intruder, and made his way upstairs. In doing so, he found Rictavio sneaking around, and Rictavio made a hasty exit after being attacked by Isaac, who the Baron had sent to retrieve the crazed druid. Taking advantage of this moment, and hearing the calls of intruder and combat from upstairs, the party rushed to help with such intruder, and killed Isaac in his room when no one else was around apart from them, surrounded only by the watchful eyes of the dolls that all looked like Irina. They would claim that they killed him in self-defense. Callan claimed that Isaac's arm had actually taken control of him and that he had attacked them, and his lie convinced the Baron, who let them go, but instructed them to continue following the curfew of being in Vallaki at night until he could get to the bottom of this. The Baron would also find the party had taken the opportunity to free a Barovian called Udo, who the Baron had locked up and was torturing for speaking out against his festivals. Max freed the young man and told him to go to the temple where he had previously met his mother, who was crying in distress about the whole thing. The party split up once more, most returning to the inn, but Max went to the temple to check on Udo. He advised Udo flee town and gave him a weapon to fight his way out. Udo said goodbye to his mother and snuck off to the north from the church, just as Isaac and a patrol of guards were coming by the church to ask Favalushin to aid the Baron in a matter. Max stalled the guards and Isaac and bought Udo time before having to head back to the inn himself. They rested, knowing that this house of cards they had stacked up was going to get blown down any minute. And that morning, whenever they headed out of the Blue Water Inn, they were greeted with a horrible sight. Far to the east, the clouds had formed a visage they all knew all too well at this point, and the devil roared that the village of Barovia had failed in their duty to find the strangers in Irina, and that they would be punished. They saw a flash of light, and a blast of wind washed over them like a shockwave, followed by a brief half-second of screams. 100, say, all at once, all at different pitches and octaves. The village of Barovia was presumably no more. The party decided it best to head west, to follow up on the strange letter from the Hermit of Berez and try to take their mind off the strange events. On their way out of town, they stopped in to check on Favalushin and the others at the church, and Favalushin warned them the Baron had him commune with the dead, Isaac, and confirmed that the half-elves had killed him, and that the party had helped the stranger, not helped Isaac. The party didn't know it at the time, but the Hermit of Berez was a fiction made by Namir, as he wanted to get as close to the Amber Temple. The exact route to find he wasn't sure of, he just knew it lay somewhere on Mount Gakis, which hung over Berez like a vulture over a dying animal. The party made their way through the thick fog and mucky bogland of Berez. It was a ruin, flooded and destroyed, but as they got deeper in, passing scarecrows on wooden crosses, they found an old manor house on a hill, raised up from the bog, and a fence topped with human skulls guarded a small goat pen, inside of which some goats bleated in panic as they approached. Eventually, they disturbed the fence, and the skulls began to scream, and the scarecrows all over Berez began to come to life. Whilst the party battled these animated scarecrows with razor-sharp claws, an old crone sat in a giant skull flew over them, cackling. Baba Lysaga. She blasted them with fireballs and lightning, in doing so killing Namir twice in the fray alone. The deal with the dark power, Dalvelnar, kicked into full form, and he changed into a dwarf with black eyes with no teeth, and then a tabaxi when he rose again. This time, however, as he rose that third and final time, he heard the voice of the dark power in his mind. A failure you are. Seek me out in the Amber Temple, if you wish to prove you have what it takes. Eventually, Baba Lysaga's flying skull was destroyed, and she rose up her house from the swamp, an old tree stump that walked on its roots, with a wilting wooden hut atop it. She just managed to get into her home before Namir loosed the killing blow in the form of an arrow through her eye, but the hut did not stop on its path of destruction. The party, at this point, all wounded terribly and struggling to get away from the ever-gaining house through the thick bog, tried to flee, and in doing so encountered 3 werewolves on the road just outside the battleground. They were discussing if the witch Babalasaga was truly dead, and upon having this news confirmed to them, the Keepers of the Feather jumped into action, using their immunity to non-magical damage to quickly best the walking hut, where it collapsed lifeless on the side of the marsh. The Were-Ravens, who introduced himself as Radovan, Laszlo, and Muriel, aided Namir in clearing the house itself, but, distracted by an unconscious Callan, Maximilian and Melville could not help when a trapped chest took Namir down for the final time. His body collapsed back, and the Were-Ravens, with no healing immediately available to them and too busy fighting a small corpse of animated claws, the monster hunter unfortunately bled out on the ground of the hut, next to the body of the hag he had bested. He had sent himself to his own death when he penned that letter the previous morning. Had he known, he might have acted differently. The group were now fully together again, alive and dead. Callan was saved and brought back to consciousness, and he tried to save his brother with a resurrection scroll that they found in the hut, but the magic was too advanced and it crumbled to dust in his fingers, and the Mir was lost to the dark mists of Barovia. The Were-Ravens split up. Muriel headed somewhere to the west in her raven form, whilst Radovan and Laszlo helped them get back to Vallaki, deciding it would be unwise to simply cart a dead body through the gates, especially with the Baron now knowing the truth behind Isaac's murder. The Keepers of the Feather headed in the town to fetch a wagon and told them to be back in an hour or so to meet up and to secretly get them back into the town. Taking a chance on the window of time they had, the party headed west to the mansion on the hill, Organ Vostholt, where just a few tens of minutes prior, they had seen a misty battle take place under its watchful gaze on their walk back from Berez. Max, Namir, and Callan approached the old mansion hoping to find weapons or armor, but they found an ally, and enemies. A Kenku monk by the name of Seeker was hiding out there, and then he helped them with their search for supplies and warned them of the ghosts, yet his warnings were not enough, and the exhausted group were overwhelmed by the revenants who still called this mansion their home. With some quick thinking, Callan had the group brought before the leader of the Order of the Silver Dragon, who told Callan they had no wish to kill Strahd, and that he is better suffering here for all eternity. Callan, still mourning the death of his brother, who only just re-entered his life, was sympathetic to this ideal, and agreed to make sure the party would not kill Strahd and only prolong his suffering. Vladimir Holmraven agreed to the terms if Callan could go to Ravenloft and retrieve the skull of their old leader, the dragon Organ Vost, and return it to its intended final resting place. The party limped back from the mansion all the way down to the crossroads where they met with the wagon of Were-Ravens, who snuck them back inside to the Blue Water Inn. The Keepers of the Feather agreed to hide Namir's body and keep it safe for the time being, and Callan paid Danica for safe haven for 3 nights. The party rested and prepared themselves for the Festival of the Burning Sun, which the Baron had invited them to be guests of honour at the previous night at dinner, before Isaac's demise. During the preparations for whatever the festival would hold, Rictavio found his way back to the Blue Water Inn and discussed with them. After perhaps seeing them at the Baron's house before, he was concerned. He begged them to help save the Valley of Barovia, and he did not call upon the group before him, he called upon the players, Doogie, Rob, Sam and Adam, reminding them that just as the party were stuck, they were stuck too, like the souls of Barovia, and they would live countless lives until Strahd was no more. Rictavio left them on that note, and said he would hide in the crowd and help if needed at the festival. With confusion and hope in their hearts, they readied themselves, a plan was hatched, and they set off. The Festival of the Burning Sun could not have been a more torrid affair. It was greeted with a torrential downpour, the Baron failing to light the wicker sun due to such rain. Taking advantage of such an embarrassing moment, the party hopped on rooftops and Callan actually rallied the crowd and the Wallachians against the Baron, despite Vargas's best attempts to keep them on his side. With no intimidating Isaac there was just no sway. Once the Baron was dealt with, Callan called upon the Wallachians that it was time to rule themselves, and one noble, one Vasily von Holtz, met them with slow clap and applause, and he offered to rule the town as Baron, as he was the last true noble line of Wallachia after the Wachters and the Valakoviches. Callan presented the holy symbol of Ravenkind and let sunlight wash over the crowd, prompting Vasily to swiftly leave the square, fully defeated as the mob flocked to the first glimpse of sunlight they had had in their whole lives. Callan called for a council to be established, and suggests any Wallachians interested should return the following day around noon. And with that, the festival was over. The mob dispersed and the guards escorted the Baron and his family to their manor to be placed under arrest until the new council would decide what to do with them. The party then gave chase after Vasily, who baited Melville all the way to the coffin maker's workshop. Standing in the doorway, he revealed his true form, the slicked black hair, pale skin, and charming visage of Strahd, who teasingly invited Melville to come inside. And then he slipped out of sight, and by the time the rest of the group arrived, Melville pointed out a cluster of 6 bats flying away to Castle Ravenloft. The party, figuring they might be worthwhile searching for clues or anything left by the vampire, searched the coffin maker's workshop for anything they might have missed before, thinking it to be safe. But it was an ambush. Strahd actually left all the vampire spawn in the storage room upstairs, summoned a swarm of bats to escort him back to Castle Ravenloft, in a blind attempt to fool the party, which they fell for. The group, still in a rough shape after both Berez and Lorgan-Vostholt in one day, and 5 vampire spawn proved too much. Max and Melville both perish alongside the vampire spawn. Max, however, finds a deal that the mayor had taken once before and agrees to it, finding himself reincarnated as a halfling. Melville is offered the same, but he refuses, and his soul is trapped in the mists with Nymir's. Eventually, the Keepers of the Feather are alerted of this, and come to aid the party with the cleanup. The Were-Ravens burn any vampire spawn who weren't reduced to ash by the sunlight from the holy symbol of Ravenloft, of Ravenkind, and take watch over Melville's body until the party can decide what to do with it. The chaos over, they return to Bluewater Inn and rest, and that night Max dreams of Dalvel Nar, who tells him to seek answers at the Amber Temple, much like happened to Nymir. The next day, a stranger comes to town, explaining he's looking for his mentor. Callan is intrigued by the individual and agrees to let him stay at the Bluewater Inn despite paying for the safe haven with Danica. The stranger introduced himself to be called Lux and agreed to help the party with dealing with Strahd if they could help him find his mentor, a master of planar travel. The Burgomeister's mansion was then searched thoroughly by the group, and they found the Baronet's secret room in the attic where he'd been practicing magic. They could correctly conclude that this is the reason why the butler and the lady-in-waiting are missing, and they even discovered the tortured dead body of Udo in the same place they found him last time. The Baron must have got his way with him. They brought him to the church where his mother was, so he could be buried, and Favolution agreed to do it, and once it was done he would follow up to the council meeting, but he may be slightly late due to the new task he had ahead of him. The council were decided by who volunteered to join, and once all the Valachians were happy with their council, it featured Favolution, Blinksy, the acting captain of the guard, a woman called Grudjenko, Vasily von Holtz, Stella Vactor, and Laszlo, the were-raven who'd helped the party back at Berez. It also featured the town baker and candlestick maker, just to get a sort of, inclusion. The party, full well knowing Vasily was Strahd in disguise, especially after yesterday's events, used the holy symbol of Ravenkind to attack him with sunlight. But by now, Strahd had already charmed almost the full council, who in turn attacked the party back to defend their good friend Vasily, allowing him to flee the combat and reach safety. The council met and had much to discuss, including what to do with the Burgomeister and his family, and now the party having immediately attacked the council they had strove so hard to make. The Council of the Valaki, still charmed by Strahd, elected the heroes should be exiled from Vallaki and would no longer be welcome here. Callan persuaded them at least to rediscuss this matter the following day, and that he would leave a letter at the Lunar River crossroads for the council to read and reply to if they chose to lift the exile. The party gathered their things and left Vallaki, heading towards the Wizards of Wine's winery. As they approached the vineyard, they were waved over by a group hiding in a thicket of trees to the north of the winery itself. They revealed themselves to be the Martikov family, and among them the party recognised Muriel, a were-raven who they had met back in Berez. After much debate, Davian Martikov, the old crow and head of the family, agreed that he would help them with the treasure they sought after from their Taroka reading, if they would clear the winery of the wild men and blights that had taken up residence inside. The party agreed, and as they got to the building, a mass of 40 plants came to life in the vines themselves and began chasing them, forcing the group inside, where they barricaded themselves inside the workshop and began to make their way upstairs, hoping to find shelter and safety. And, as they fight through the winery, that is where our story begins.